Welcome to Film 5D, the show about everything film, now with the A7S III. I'm Aaron Hammock, and today I'll be taking a first look at the newest lens released by Sony this year, the G-Master 35mm 1.4. Alright, so my goal is to keep this video around 10 minutes because the last 3 videos I've done on my channel this year went well above 20 minutes. But today we're taking a look at the lens that I've been waiting for at least the last 5 years, the 35mm 1.4 G-Master Prime. And by the way, I'm going to be recording the majority of this episode with this lens. Now, when Sony released the Alpha 7 mirrorless cameras back in 2014, and I switched from my Canon 5D Mark II at the time, hence the name of this channel, to Sony, I sold all of my Canon lenses. And at the time, there were only a few options available for the full frame E-mount. A 24 to 70mm f4 Zeiss zoom lens, which I recently sold in lieu of my newer 2.8 G-Master. Then there was also the 55mm 1.8 from Zeiss, which I still use to this day and remains one of my sharpest lenses. And then finally there was this 35mm f2.8 from Zeiss. This lens right here honestly has been one of the lenses that I've used the most, along with the 55mm. It's just so small and lightweight and has tremendously fast autofocus, as we'll see in some tests later. And just overall, it has been the lens that I grabbed the most in the past 7 years since I first bought it in 2014 when I head out with my A7S. This is the one I typically bring. However, the one thing it didn't have was great image quality, which, I mean, it's kind of expected given the size of it. But over the past few years, Sony has been coming out with more and more lenses to support the E-mount cameras like the Sony A7S III. And I've been slowly adding G-Masters to my collection in an effort to bolster my flexibility with different focal lengths while also maintaining the best possible quality. First, I got the 70 to 200 f2.8, and then I got the 24 to 70 f2.8, and then the 16 to 35 f2.8 for wide-angle shots. Then I started grabbing primes like the 24mm f1.8, and now this 35mm f1.4. In fact, there are more lenses on my radar that are coming out next month in May, including the 50mm 1.2 and the 14mm 1.8 ultra-wide. But if you clicked on this video, then you're probably interested in the 35mm in particular, the 1.4, which I'm shooting with right now. So let's take a look at what you get and do some tests. Like all other Sony FE G-Masters, you get your typical documentation, a soft travel case, a carrying strap, which I never use, a lens hood, and then of course the lens. Now this lens isn't too heavy at all, honestly, way lighter than I thought it would be. It has a declickable physical aperture ring like most other G-Master primes, and has a filter thread of 67mm, which is very common among the other Sony FE lenses. Now for these tests, I'll be comparing this lens to the 35mm 2.8 from Zeiss, which I have right here. Now there's also an f1.8 35mm that came out a few years ago that's just a regular Sony non-G-Master lens, and it's around the same price, but I never got that one. I know that it is better quality than this Zeiss that I've been using, but this one's smaller, and that one I was just waiting for the G-Master, which I knew inevitably would come out. Also, I'm going to be recording on all these tests in 4K on my A7S III, so I won't be pixel peeping with an A7R with an ultra high resolution JPEG image or something like that, so these should be pretty practical for other alpha video shooters out there. And the reason I'm kind of doing this first look video and not just a full-fledged review, even though I'm going to cover a lot of aspects of this lens, I'm basically doing this for other people that maybe bought this lens when they first got their Sony A7 or A7R or A7S back in 2014. And this was one of the only 3 lenses available, 5 lenses available at the time. And are you looking to potentially upgrade it now? And this is the answer that I'm going to hopefully be giving you. All right, here we are running some tests. First one is going to be focus breathing. This is the G-Master at 2.8. You can look at the right side there with the color checker and you can really see how much focus breathing there is. And here's the Zeiss also at 2.8. This one's not as bad. I would say it's about 20% better in terms of the amount of focus breathing, but the focus accuracy in general certainly isn't as good with the fly-by-wire. Then I also did a couple tests with my zoom G-Masters. This is the 16 to 35mm, and this one was pretty impressive, but the 24 to 70mm, both of which I did at 35mm, is really impressive. It doesn't really move at all in terms of the focus breathing. Now just a quick test with the Zeiss, looking at how fast that autofocus is. Incredibly fast still. And then the G-Master is also pretty good. Definitely hunts a little bit more. Not quite as accurate, but still pretty impressive for such a wide, fast lens. And checking the Zeiss now with how close you can focus. And here's the G-Master, about 2 times better in terms of how close you can focus. And now we're looking at the control of flares and to see how much detail and contrast we're keeping. That was the Zeiss. This is the G-Master. For me, both of these were pretty much similar. Now let's look at bokeh at 2.8 for both lenses. As we punch in here, we don't notice too much of a difference at 300%, but when we jump into 600%, you're going to notice a little bit of onioning there on the Zeiss, which is the top one. And here we have f1.4, f2, and f2.8 for the G-Master, just to see the difference in the bokeh at this range. F2 there, f1.4 looks really nice. It does get a little bit distorted on the edges, you can see, not quite as circular, but still pretty impressive. Here's the Zeiss, and just doing just the lights here, no foreground element this time. And then same thing for the G-Master, also at 2.8, though since the focus throw can go so much closer, the bokeh definitely gets bigger. So I resize it here to be a little bit more comparable. And then now when we zoom in on both of them, you start to see a much bigger difference with how circular the G-Master is and the oniony aspect that you get with the Zeiss. And then just for fun here, I go to f2 just to show how big the bokeh can get, and then f1.4. This is at about a distance of 2 meters, and you can just see you can get some pretty cool shots with this. Now we're going to look at a landscape shot. This is the Zeiss at 5.6. This should give you a good idea what level of detail you can expect in landscape photography or video. This is at 4K, and here's the G-Master also at 5.6. We're going to punch in 400%, and you can really see a difference there in those palm trees. And this is in the center as well, which is pretty impressive for the G-Master. Now let's take the brick wall, like every lens test should have. And this is at 2.8. And you're going to notice a huge difference in the vignetting. The Zeiss has a lot more vignetting around the corners than the G-Master is even throughout. Punching into 400%, you can see it's slightly sharper for the G-Master, and the corner is way sharper for the G-Master than the Zeiss was. At 5.6, with the G-Master, going to get pretty much the same results, but the Zeiss is going to get a little bit better in terms of vignetting and sharpness. But the G-Master seems to be really consistent across the different apertures. Here's 400% again, much closer, but again, the G-Master is definitely winning here. And just for fun, let's look at f1.4. In the center at 400%, we definitely lose a little bit of sharpness for sure. But when we look at the corner, it's really sharp still. And actually, when we compare that to the Zeiss, you can see a huge difference, even 1.4 versus 2.8, which is just incredible. All right, so there you have it. What'd you think? Did you notice a difference between the lenses, especially when it comes to the quality? I was actually really surprised that the focus breathing on the new G-Master was so much worse. And also, the Zeiss still seems to be the king when it comes to autofocus speed, which is really quite impressive. Honestly, I thought I'd be selling this lens to help pay for my next prime, but I might wait a couple months, like maybe 6 months, and see if I end up reaching for it, given that it's so small. It's like almost a pancake size lens. Doesn't exactly make it possible for you to fit your camera in your pocket, but maybe a coat. And so we'll see over the next few months if I end up reaching for it, or if just the quality of the G-Master just overwhelms me and I just keep pulling for that one. And indeed, the 35mm 1.4 G-Master was better in a lot of areas, including one, speed. Obviously, it's a full 2 stops brighter than the 2.8 at f1.4, which resulted in number 2, better bokeh, and number 3, it was also much sharper at 2.8 than the Zeiss. And then 4, the focus is very accurate and repeatable, unlike the fly-by-wire that you get with the Zeiss lenses, like my 55 and this 35. And it was also able to focus at about 2 times closer than the Zeiss, which was actually really impressive. I didn't even realize that was going to be a thing. And then finally, number 6, it does have an aperture ring for easier run and gun shooting to quickly switch between aperture, especially if you're shooting in aperture priority mode. By the way, quick side note / observation is that because this lens is bigger and sticks out more than my Zeiss, it actually means that I can now use it in this spot right here. So I'll be using it regularly to film here at my desk. Since now my ultra wide monitors, which are right here, aren't getting in the way, since this lens is a little bit longer and kind of sticks past them, which wasn't the case using my 35mm Zeiss 2.8. Now, if you're interested in this lens or any of the other ones I mentioned in this video, you can click the links in the description below. Buying through my links helps us support the channel so I can make more videos like this one, and I really do appreciate it. But that's it for this one. Give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed this quick review, or a thumbs down if you had no interest in this lens. Leave any questions in the comments below and I'll do my best to respond there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. By the way, if you haven't subscribed yet, you can do so by clicking the button on screen. And for more information about the Sony 35mm 1.4 G-Master, as well as other Sony lenses, check out my blog over on my website at filmin5d.com. Thanks again for watching.